My name is Jack Buckley. I've spent my life drawn to the past, to the echoes of lives lived and stories untold. This passion led me to the grand old governor's mansion. Its weathered facade held a century's worth of secrets. I was there to uncover them. The mansion was imposing. Its shadow stretched long in the afternoon sun. I could almost feel the weight of its history pressing down on me. The air was thick with anticipation. I stepped inside, eager to begin my investigation. The mansion was a treasure trove of artifacts and antiques. Each piece whispered tales of bygone eras. I felt a thrill course through me. This was my element, my purpose. This time, however, my purpose would be tested like never before. The governor's mansion had seen its share of joy and sorrow. It was the latter that seemed to linger in its very walls. The story of Caroline Crittenden, the governor's daughter, was particularly tragic. Caroline had been a bright and cheerful child. Her laughter had once echoed through the halls, but tragedy struck in the summer of 1883. Diphtheria, a cruel and swift killer, had claimed her life. Caroline's death cast a pall over the mansion. Her memory lingered, a haunting presence that refused to be forgotten. The staff spoke of soft cries, echoing from the abandoned nursery. Some even claimed to see a fleeting glimpse of a young girl in a white dress. My footsteps echoed in the silence of the mansion. Each room I explored seemed to hold its breath, waiting for me to pass. The grand staircase was particularly unsettling. The wood creaked beneath my feet. It was as though the mansion itself was groaning under the weight of its sorrow. I paused at the landing. A cold draft sent shivers down my spine. It seemed to emanate from the attic door. It stood ajar, beckoning me forward. My heart pounded in my chest. I knew that the attic was said to be Caroline's favorite hiding place. Taking a deep breath, I pushed the attic door open. The hinges groaned in protest, as though warning me to turn back. I stepped inside, the musty air thick in my lungs. The attic was dark and dusty, the only light filtering in through a single grimy window. The attic was a sensory overload. The air was heavy with the scent of decay and dust. It clung to my clothes, filled my nostrils. The temperature dropped noticeably. I felt a chill run down my spine, raising goosebumps on my arms. Shadows danced in the dim light. They seemed to writhe and twist, taking on menacing forms. I felt a presence here, something unseen but undeniably felt. The air crackled with an unseen energy. A child's doll lay abandoned in the corner. Its porcelain face was cracked, one eye staring blankly into the void. I felt a pang of sadness. This was Caroline's domain, a place where her memory still lingered. "Hello?" My voice echoed in the stillness. The only response was the rustling of unseen things in the shadows. I took a step closer to the center of the attic. The air grew colder still, and then I saw her, a translucent figure shimmering in the dim light. She was a young girl, no more than 10 years old. Her dress, once bright and cheerful, was now faded and gray. Her face, though beautiful, was etched with a profound sadness. It was Caroline. I could feel it in my bones. Her eyes met mine, and a chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the temperature. They held a depth of sorrow that was both unsettling and heartbreaking. Caroline didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her sorrow was a tangible thing, filling the attic like smoke. It pressed down on me, suffocating me. I wanted to reach out to her, to offer her comfort, but I knew it was not possible. She was beyond my reach, lost in her own world of sorrow. I watched as she faded away, disappearing into the shadows as quickly as she had appeared. The attic felt colder now, emptier. The silence was deafening. I was alone once more, yet the air still crackled with the residue of Caroline's sorrow. I left the attic, my heart heavy. The governor's mansion, once a place of grandeur and prestige, now felt like a mausoleum. It was a place where the past refused to stay buried. The experience stayed with me long after I left the mansion. The sorrow in Caroline's eyes, the palpable sadness that clung to the air. It was a reminder that some wounds, some losses, never truly heal. They linger on, echoing through time. I continued my work, researching and documenting the history of the mansion. But I never forgot Caroline. Her story, her sorrow, became a part of me. It was a reminder of the enduring power of the past and the haunting whispers that linger in the shadows.
The old house stood on the hill. It was a grand old house, Ravenswood, imposing, dark. It watched me as I approached. The iron gates were rusted, the stone pillars were crumbling, but the house was still magnificent. I am Amelia Foster, a paranormal investigator. My work is not for the faint of heart, but I am drawn to the darkness. I seek out the stories that linger in the shadows. I was here at Ravenswood because of the stories of the ghost that haunted its halls. The sun was setting as I arrived. The sky was awash with shades of orange and purple. A light breeze rustled the leaves in the trees. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth. It was the perfect night for a haunting. Ravenswood was built in 1880 by a wealthy businessman named Edward Blackwood. He spared no expense. He wanted a house that would be the envy of all who saw it, and he succeeded. But tragedy struck the Blackwood family soon after they moved in. Edward's wife, Eleanor, died in a carriage accident. Edward was heartbroken. He closed off the house, unable to bear the memories. Years passed. The house fell into disrepair. It was then that a young woman named Nadine Leonard came into the picture. She was a distant relative of the Blackwoods. She had inherited the house upon Edward's death. Nadine was a talented pianist. She saw the potential in Ravenswood. She poured her heart and soul into restoring it to its former glory. The locals say Nadine was a beautiful woman. She had long, flowing hair and piercing blue eyes. She was also a kind and gentle soul. She often opened her home to the less fortunate. She hosted lavish parties. The sound of music and laughter filled the air. For a time, Ravenswood seemed to shake off its tragic past. But tragedy struck again. One stormy night, Nadine was playing the piano in the music room. A fire broke out in the house. The flames spread quickly. Nadine was trapped. She died in the fire. They say her screams could be heard for miles around. Since then, Ravenswood has remained empty. No one dared to live there. The stories began. Whispers of strange noises, cold spots, and the ghostly figure of a woman in white. Some say it is Nadine, her spirit unable to find peace. They say she still walks the halls of Ravenswood, her mournful piano music echoing in the night. There are whispers of a locked bedroom on the top floor. They say it was Nadine's room, and that inside her favorite Christmas ornaments still hang on a dusty, withered tree. They say her music box still plays a haunting melody. I was determined to uncover the truth behind these stories, to see for myself if Ravenswood was truly haunted, to encounter the ghost of Nadine Leonard. Section 4. The Waltz of the Lost Soul. As I stepped inside Ravenswood, I was greeted by a wave of cold air. The air was thick with the smell of dust and decay. Cobwebs hung from every corner. The only light came from the moon shining through the grimy windows. I could hear the sound of my own breath, and something else. A faint humming noise, like music coming from far away. I made my way through the house. Each room was more dilapidated than the last. Furniture was rotting. Paint was peeling off the walls. In the music room, I found the grand piano. Its keys were covered in dust. I gently pressed one of the keys. A discordant note rang out, breaking the silence. I continued my exploration. I found the locked bedroom on the top floor. The door creaked open as if it hadn't been touched in years. The air inside was heavy and oppressive. And there it was. A dusty Christmas tree stood in the corner. Withered and faded ornaments hung from its branches. And on a small table beside the bed, a music box. I reached out and opened it. A haunting melody filled the room. It was the sound of a waltz. And then I saw her. In the center of the room, a figure began to solidify. A woman in a white dress. She was beautiful, just as the stories described. Her long hair flowed down her back. Her eyes were filled with a deep sadness. She glided across the room, her feet not seeming to touch the floor. She moved towards me, her hand outstretched. I felt no fear, only a profound sense of sorrow. She was Nadine, trapped in her eternal waltz. This house, her prison, her only escape, the music. I took her hand. It was cold, insubstantial, yet her touch sent shivers down my spine. We began to dance. The music swelled, filling the room. It was a bittersweet melody, full of longing and regret. As we danced, I felt a connection to Nadine. I understood her pain, her inability to move on. I wanted to help her, but how do you help a ghost find peace? The music faded. Nadine's form began to flicker. She smiled at me, a look of gratitude in her eyes. And then, she was gone. I was alone in the room. The only sound was the ticking of the old clock on the wall. I left Ravenswood as dawn was breaking. I never saw Nadine again, but I will never forget her, or the spectral waltz we shared. Ravenswood may be haunted, but it is also a place of great sadness and beauty, a place where the past and present collide, and where the spirits of the dead still dance among the living.
The wind howled a mournful cry that echoed across the rolling hills of Knob Noster. I'm Elias Thorne, a local historian and a reluctant ghost hunter. Tonight I stood at the foot of the hill, rain lashing against my face. The old legend of the hermit's lantern felt less like a story and more like a looming threat. Knob Noster, a town nestled close to Whiteman Air Force Base, took its name from these very hills. Knob, they used to say, meant a small mountain, but this one held a dark secret. A hermit, they called him, a man who shunned the town, his only connection a young slave he'd send for supplies. The slave, a friendly soul, was well liked. Then he vanished. The hermit, his face a mask of cold indifference, came into town himself. When questioned, he'd simply turn away, a scowl twisting his lips. Whispers started he'd murdered the boy. And then the storm. Lightning cracked, illuminating the hill's dark silhouette. Witnesses swore they saw a lantern, a flickering yellow light, bobbing and weaving through the trees just before the sky exploded with light. The next morning, they found him. The hermit, his body sprawled on the hillside, his face frozen in a mask of sheer, unadulterated terror. Tonight, the legend was alive. The rain hammered down and the wind screamed, mimicking the hermit's silent scream. I started to climb, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. Each step a heavy, reluctant commitment. The trees swayed, their branches clawing at me. The air grew cold, a damp, bone-chilling cold that seeped into my skin. I could hear a faint rustling, a whisper carried on the wind. Then I saw it. A faint yellow glow flickering through the trees, moving up the hill, the lantern. My heart pounded, a frantic drumbeat against my ribs. I stopped, my breath catching in my throat. The light moved closer, bobbing and weaving, as if carried by a restless hand. The air crackled with energy, a static charge that made the hairs on my arms stand on end. The lantern glowed brighter, casting long, distorted shadows that danced and writhed around me. Suddenly a figure emerged from the darkness, a tall, gaunt shape, its face obscured by the shadows, but the yellow glow of the lantern illuminated the outline of a hand holding it. The figure was moving towards me. I felt a wave of icy dread wash over me, a sense of overwhelming terror. I wanted to run, to flee back down the hill, but my legs wouldn't move. The figure stopped, its lantern casting an eerie glow on my face. I could feel its presence, a cold, malevolent energy that seemed to drain the warmth from my body. And then the wind carried a faint whisper, a guttural moan that seemed to come from the very earth itself. Lightning flashed, illuminating the figure's face for a fleeting moment, a face frozen in terror, just as the legend described. Then, darkness. I stumbled back, my flashlight beam shaken, my breath ragged. The figure was gone, the lantern extinguished, but the cold, the fear, the whisper of the wind, they lingered, a chilling reminder of the hermit's curse and the restless light that still haunted the hills of Knob Noster.
The night was still, too still. I could feel the silence pressing down on me, heavy and thick. The air was cold, biting at any exposed skin. I pulled my jacket tighter around me, my breath misting in the air. I was on patrol, walking the grounds of Jefferson Barracks. The old buildings loomed in the darkness, silent sentinels guarding centuries of secrets. Jefferson Barracks. Even the name sent a shiver down my spine. Established in 1826, it was one of the oldest military installations west of the Mississippi. Generations of soldiers had trained and lived here, and died here. I continued my patrol, my footsteps echoing in the silence. A faint light emanated from a second-story window, casting an eerie yellow glow into the night. Curiosity and fear warred within me. What was that light? My hand instinctively went to my holster. I took a deep breath, steeling my nerves. I had a duty to investigate. I approached the building cautiously, my boots crunching on the gravel. The closer I got, the brighter the light became. I reached the front of the building and peered up at the window. Taking another deep breath, I entered the building. The air inside was stale and heavy, thick with the weight of history. The floorboards creaked ominously beneath my weight, each step sending echoes bouncing off the walls. I reached the door and peered cautiously inside. The room was sparsely furnished with a desk, a chair, and a few bookshelves lining the walls. The light was coming from an oil lamp on the desk, but that wasn't what made my breath catch in my throat. Standing by the window, his back to me, was a man. He wore a dark blue uniform, the fabric faded with age. He was speaking in a low voice, his words directed out the window. I cleared my throat, my voice catching slightly. "Sir?" I asked, my voice echoing strangely in the quiet room. He turned, and I felt my blood run cold. Who are you?" he stammered, his voice thick with confusion. "What year is this?" His words hung in the air, heavy with an emotion I couldn't quite place. "Sir, this is Jefferson Barracks," I replied, my voice barely a whisper. "It's 2025. Are you all right?" I took a step towards him, my hand outstretched, but he flinched away. 2025? He whispered, his voice hoarse. "That's impossible. It's 1863. The war is still raging." He shook his head, his eyes wide with disbelief. I didn't know what to say. He was gone. One minute he was there, the next he was simply gone. vanished into thin air, leaving behind only the faint scent of dust and decay. I stood there for a moment, my heart pounding in my chest, trying to process what I had just witnessed. Had I imagined it? Was it the stress of the job, playing tricks on my mind? I looked around the room, but there was no sign of the officer. The only evidence he had ever been there was the lingering chill in the air and the faint scent of gunpowder that clung to the room. I walked over to the window, peering out into the darkness. The cemetery lay in the distance, the headstones silent sentinels under the watchful gaze of the moon. I didn't have an explanation for what I had seen, but as I stood there, looking out over the silent grounds of Jefferson Barracks, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The iron gate clanged shut behind me, the sound echoing through the cavernous space a metallic death knell. I, Haley Jenkins, paranormal investigator, stood at the threshold of the Missouri State Penitentiary, the bloodiest 47 acres in America. The air was thick, heavy, and cold, even for a late October night. My flashlight beam cut through the oppressive darkness, illuminating the peeling paint and rusting bars of the abandoned cell blocks. The stories I'd heard, the whispers of tormented souls, the chilling tales of death row and the gas chamber, they were no longer just stories. They were a tangible presence, a weight pressing down on me. I started in cell block 4, notorious for its violent history. My EMF reader flickered erratically, spiking into the red zone. "Anyone here?" I asked, my voice a shaky whisper in the vast emptiness. A cold gust of air swept through the cell, and the temperature dropped several degrees. My breath plumed white in the beam of my flashlight. A faint, disembodied whisper brushed my ear, a guttural moan that seemed to emanate from the very walls. I spun around, my heart pounding against my ribs, but there was nothing, just the shadows stretching and twisting in the dim light. Moving down the corridor, I reached death row. The oppressive silence was broken only by the drip, drip, drip of water from a leaky pipe, each drop a morbid metronome marking the passage of time. I felt a prickling sensation on my skin, like unseen eyes watching me. I paused at the entrance to the gas chamber. 40 souls had breathed their last here, their final moments filled with terror and agony. The air was thick with a palpable sense of dread. My flashlight beam danced across the rusted metal chair, the straps still dangling, a grim reminder of the finality of death. Suddenly, a full-bodied apparition materialized before me. A tall, gaunt figure, his face contorted in a silent scream, his eyes filled with an unimaginable terror. He reached out a skeletal hand, and I felt an icy touch on my arm, a chilling reminder of the cold grip of death. I stumbled back, my breath catching in my throat. The figure vanished as quickly as it had appeared, leaving behind a lingering chill and the overwhelming sense of despair. I fled the gas chamber, my legs trembling, my heart racing. I found myself in the infirmary, the place where the wounded and dying were brought. The air was thick with the scent of antiseptic and decay, a ghostly echo of the suffering that had once filled these walls. I heard the faint sound of footsteps, a slow, deliberate shuffle approaching from the far end of the room. My flashlight beam caught a shadowy figure, its form indistinct, moving towards me. It seemed to glide, not walk, its presence, a cold, heavy weight pressing down on me. I tried to speak, but my voice was lost in the rising panic. The figure reached me, its cold, spectral hand grasping my arm. I felt a surge of icy energy, a wave of despair that threatened to overwhelm me. I screamed a raw, primal sound that echoed through the empty halls. Then, just as suddenly, it was gone. The figure vanished, leaving me trembling and breathless, my skin clammy with cold sweat. I fled the infirmary, my legs carrying me through the labyrinthine corridors, desperate to escape the oppressive presence of the penitentiary. I reached the gate, the rusted iron bars a welcome sight. As I stepped out into the cool night air, I turned back to look at the imposing structure, its dark silhouette etched against the starless sky. The echoes of the tormented souls, the whispers of the dead still lingered in the air, a chilling reminder of the darkness that lay within. I knew then that I would never forget the horrors of the Missouri State Penitentiary, the bloodiest 47 acres in America. And I knew with a chilling certainty that some of those souls were not at rest.
The moon hung high above Spring Creek, casting an eerie silver glow on the deserted path below. The only sounds were the chirping of crickets and the rustling leaves. A gentle breeze whispered through the trees, carrying the scent of damp earth and honeysuckle. The path snaked along the creek, disappearing into the shadows of ancient oaks and whispering willows. Their gnarled branches reached out like skeletal fingers towards the moon. Beneath them, the creek, usually alive with the sound of rushing water, seemed to hold its breath. The water, reflecting the moon's pale light, appeared almost milky and opaque. It moved slowly as if weighed down by some unseen burden. It was a night when the veil between the world of the living and the realm of the dead seemed thin. Thomas Ashton, a man of science and logic, scoffed at such notions. He was a firm believer in the tangible, the verifiable. Ghost stories held no allure for him. They were mere products of overactive imaginations. He had lived in the small town all his life and dismissed the local legends as mere superstition. Thomas, with his neatly trimmed beard and spectacles, looked every bit the scholar he was. He prided himself on his rationality, believing everything could be explained with reason and logic. Ghosts, spirits, specters were nothing more than figments of imagination. He trusted in the evidence of his senses, in the concrete world around him, and tonight he was determined to prove it to himself and to anyone else who cared to listen. The legend of the Headless Cobbler was a tale as old as the town itself. It spoke of a cobbler, a solitary man, known for his skill with a needle and thread. One night, driven by greed or madness, he murdered a wealthy traveler for his boots. The townsfolk, upon discovering the cobbler's gruesome act, sought swift and brutal justice. They severed his head from his body and cast his remains into Smollett's Cave, a dark chasm at the edge of Spring Creek. Locals whispered that the cobbler's cries could still be heard echoing from its depths. They said that the cobbler's spirit, unable to find peace, remained trapped within the cave, and on moonlit nights the headless cobbler could be seen near the cave, searching endlessly for his missing head. His presence was marked by an unsettling rhythmic tapping, the sound of his cobbler's hammer echoing in the stillness of the night. Tonight, Thomas was determined to put an end to the superstitious nonsense. Armed with only a flashlight and his unwavering skepticism, he set off down the moonlit path. He walked with a confident stride, his eyes scanning the shadows. He told himself that he was not afraid. He was a man of science. But as he ventured deeper into the woods, a sense of unease crept over him. The air grew heavy, charged with an unseen energy. The shadows seemed to twist and contort, taking on menacing shapes. Every rustle of leaves, every snapping twig, sent a jolt of adrenaline through him. He found himself stopping frequently, turning to shine his flashlight into the darkness behind him. His heart pounded in his chest, a frantic drumbeat against his ribs. Thomas's flashlight flickered, casting erratic shadows on the path. He could hear the rhythmic tapping, growing louder, closer. His breath quickened, and he felt a cold sweat on his brow. Suddenly, the beam of his flashlight caught a figure in the distance. It was the headless cobbler, hammer in hand, moving towards him with a slow, deliberate gait. Thomas's skepticism shattered, replaced by sheer terror. He turned and ran, the sound of the cobbler's hammer echoing in his ears. The legend was real, and it was coming for him. As the dawn breaks, the eerie silence of Spring Creek is shattered by the distant sound of footsteps. The villagers, now awake, gather around the old cobbler's shop, whispering tales of the night's encounter. The legend of the headless cobbler grows, leaving an indelible mark on the hearts of those who witnessed it. In the soft morning light, Thomas Ashton stands among them, his face pale, eyes wide with the memory of his terrifying ordeal. The once skeptic has now become the latest storyteller of Spring Creek. Forever changed by the night he came face to face with fear.
The old farmhouse loomed before me, silhouetted against the bruised twilight. It stood desolate and decaying, a skeletal monument to a dark and violent past. This was the infamous James Farm, the childhood home of the notorious outlaw Jesse James. My name is Clara Bellwether, and I chase ghosts. I had come to this desolate patch of Missouri on a whim, drawn by the whispers of the farm's bloody history and chilling tales of paranormal activity. Locals told of ghostly apparitions, unexplained noises, and a palpable sense of dread. Tonight, I would tempt fate and confront the darkness within those crumbling walls. As I stepped out of my car, the silence was deafening, broken only by the rustling of leaves in the wind. Clutching my bag of ghost hunting equipment, I approached the house, my heart pounding. The dilapidated porch groaned under my weight as I stepped onto it, as if warning me to turn back. The front door creaked open on rusty hinges, revealing a darkened interior that smelled of dust and decay. As my eyes adjusted to the gloom, I could make out the remnants of a life long gone. Faded wallpaper, a crumbling fireplace, a dusty rocking chair frozen in time. Every inch of the house seemed to whisper tales of its former occupants. It was here, within these very walls, that Jesse James and his brother Frank had spent their formative years. The farm had been a sanctuary for them, a place to escape the law and plot their daring heists. But it had also been a place of violence and tragedy. During the Civil War, the James family had been targeted by Union soldiers, their home raided and their mother injured. Moving deeper into the house, I felt a distinct chill, as if a cold hand had brushed against my skin. Shadows danced at the edge of my vision, and the silence was broken only by the sound of my own heartbeat. I was surrounded by the ghosts of the past, their presence palpable in the musty air and the oppressive atmosphere. As I stood in the living room, a floorboard creaked behind me. I spun around, my heart racing, but there was nothing there. Just an empty room shrouded in shadows. I tried to rationalize the sound, telling myself it was just the old house settling. But deep down, a primal fear began to stir within me. Then I heard it. A faint whisper, carried on the wind. It seemed to come from the far end of the house, a soft, mournful sound that sent shivers down my spine. I strained my ears, trying to make out words, but the whisper was too faint, too fleeting. My hand instinctively went to the silver crucifix I wore around my neck, my fingers clutching it like a lifeline. Standing here now in the heart of this eerie farmhouse, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had stumbled into something truly sinister. I pressed on, my senses on high alert, determined to uncover the secrets hidden within the James farm. Reaching into my bag, I pulled out my trusty EMF reader, a device used to detect fluctuations in electromagnetic fields, often associated with paranormal activity. The device hummed to life in my hand, its digital display glowing eerily in the darkness. As I moved from room to room, the EMF reader began to sputter erratically. The numbers on the display jumped wildly, accompanied by a high-pitched whine that set my teeth on edge. Whatever presence lingered within these walls was growing stronger, bolder. Reaching the top of the stairs, I hesitated. The air here felt thick and heavy, like a suffocating blanket. It was coming from the room at the end of the hall, a room that, according to local legend, had once belonged to Jesse James himself. It was said that he had spent countless hours in that room, cleaning his guns and plotting his next move. Taking a deep breath, I stepped into the hallway, my heart pounding in my chest. The EMF reader screeched in my hand, its alarm piercing the silence like a siren. The door to Jesse's room creaked open as if inviting me in. The air inside was icy cold, and the smell of mildew and decay was almost overpowering. Moonlight streamed through a crack in the boarded-up window, casting long, eerie shadows across the floor. And then I saw him. A shadowy figure materialized in the moonlight, tall and imposing, with a Stetson hat pulled low over his brow. I couldn't make out his features, only the faint outline of his form and the piercing gaze of his eyes, which seemed to burn into me with an icy fire. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. Terror, raw and primal, flooded my senses, paralyzing me. I wanted to scream, to run, but my body refused to obey. I was rooted to the spot, trapped in the gaze of this spectral being. The air grew heavy, charged with an unseen energy that crackled like static electricity. The figure took another step, and the faint scent of gunpowder reached my nostrils, sending a fresh wave of fear through me. This was no mere apparition. This was the ghost of Jesse James himself, and he was not at peace. "Leave this place," a voice whispered, raspy and low, seeming to emanate from the very walls themselves. "Leave this place and never return." The voice sent chills down my spine, and I knew in that instant that I had seen enough. Turning on my heel, I fled from the room, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't look back, didn't dare to see if the ghostly figure was following me. I could feel its eyes on my back, cold and accusing, as I raced down the hallway and stumbled down the stairs. Bursting out of the farmhouse and into the cool night air, I didn't stop running until I reached my car. Fumbling with the keys, I unlocked the door, threw myself inside, and slammed the door shut. As I sped away from the James farm, the image of the shadowy figure lingered in my mind, seared into my memory. I had gone in search of answers, of proof that the supernatural existed. I had found something far more terrifying than I could have ever imagined.